Well, we're joined now from Rio de Janeiro by the American columnist and lawyer Glenn Greenwald, who was central to the publication of Edward Snowden's revelations in the Guardian newspaper. And that newspaper tonight, Glenn Greenwald, in its editorial, indeed published this morning, was saying, look, the best thing is for him to go back to America, face the music, and deal with it there. What's your advice?
Well, they've been very supportive of Edward Snowden the entire time that they've been editorializing, but I happen to vehemently disagree with the view that he ought to go back to the United States. The premise of that view is that the United States justice system is one that's fair, legitimate, and valid when it comes to whistleblowers, and it's proven itself to be anything but. The UN formally found that they had abused and subjected to inhuman and cruel treatment Bradley Manning. The Obama administration has persecuted whistleblowers, and so I think he has every right to seek asylum.
Right. Well, now, you've actually met him. What is he like?
He's much, much different than many of the news reports are depicting, including, to be quite frank, the one that I just listened to before we began speaking. He's somebody who has given a great deal of thought to the choice that he was making. He has planned and plotted out every single step of the way that he has taken. He knew that it would be very difficult once his identity was revealed to be able to stay out of the grasp of the United States, and yet he chose to embark on this path because he really genuinely felt that his political convictions and conscience compelled him to do so.
Do you feel that you, and indeed the newspaper that you were essentially supplying it to, had a duty to try and protect him? What was your plan for him? I mean, you know, should the authorities start running after him?
Well, sure. I mean, we have, as journalists, a duty to protect all of our sources. But there's only so much that we can do. From the very first moment that I began speaking with him, he was very emphatic about the fact that once these disclosures began, he wanted to announce his identity to the world because he felt an obligation to take responsibility for what he had done and to explain himself to his fellow citizens, to people around the world, about why it is that he chose to do what he had done. He was very thoughtful about the fact that once that happened, he would have a lot of bad options, and we spent a lot of hours making certain that he had really thought through all the consequences. But he also knew that even if he hadn't outed himself, the United States would easily discover that he was the source. And as he put it to me in the very first time we met, all my options are bad options. He's an adult. He made the choice that he made, and he's prepared to live with the consequences.
You last saw him in Hong Kong?
Correct. I last spoke with him, and I last saw him when I was in Hong Kong. I last spoke with him the day that he left Hong Kong.
And I mean, did you try to restrain him? Did you think it was a good idea to go to Russia? Or, I mean, what was going through your head? Did you realize that he was going to do a runner?
I didn't know that he had planned to leave Hong Kong that day. I'm not his lawyer, and so I wasn't consulting with him about his asylum plans or about his travel plans. But I certainly knew that he was constantly evaluating his options because he believes, as I believe, that the U.S. justice system is inherently corrupted when it comes to dealing with people who shine a light on political officials. And he had made the choice that whatever it was that he did, he wanted to stay out of the grasp of the United States, because what will happen if the United States gets him is it will render him incommunicado. We will never hear from him, not for many years, maybe not ever. Well, and he wants to participate in the debate that he started.
Let me ask you then about that, because here are the Europeans absolutely livid with what's happened. I mean, there's been a major debate in the European Parliament today. The French are extremely angry. And yet the extraordinary thing is that the information that has rendered them so angry is surely one that comes from somebody that they perhaps now have an obligation to protect.
Well, I think it's very strange. I think there's a big difference between governments and populations, as usual. I think the population of most EU states is genuinely very angry because it isn't just their government, but their own communications that are being intercepted and rediverted to the United States en masse indiscriminately. But I think the governments are playing a little bit of a game because they're pretending that they're angry at these revelations in order to placate their population, and yet at the same time they seem to be treating as an enemy the very individual who enabled the world to know that the United States was doing these things. I mean, to watch France, on the one hand, feign righteous indignation, and then on the other hand, engage in the extraordinary lawless step of denying airspace rights to the Bolivian president in order to prevent Mr. Snowden from seeking asylum, I think reveals the true nature of these governments.
Glenn Greenwald, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Rio.